أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وخاتم النبيين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm your brother Abdul-Lateef from both Arabic Virtual Academy as well as Abdul-Lateef.com. And in today's video, I want to discuss with you a question or an issue that one of the brothers sent forth. And this is an issue that a lot of us, as it comes across, because of the way it comes across, it causes problems. But we need to understand one particular principle, and this is that when the scholars are giving advice, because it sounds funny to us, we don't automatically, how to put it, step away from that which the scholars are talking about. If we're going to blame someone, we blame ourselves for misunderstanding. Because there's a lot of things. It could have gotten messed up in the translation. It could have been taken out of context. It could have been talking about a particular issue and not something in general. So we need to beware when something comes to us and it sounds strange that we don't blame the scholars all of a sudden. Where they get off, who are they to make these statements? This is because a lot of times when we look into the issue, we find that the issue is with us, not with them. Many times. Now, this particular issue is, I'll say it goes a little further than what I've heard. Like, I know when I first heard this issue, I said to myself, subhanallah, seems to be a real racist statement. And it's like, because I didn't understand certain things, because I didn't understand the reasons for the advice, I was like, wow, man, our deen tells us other than this. And after actually being able to look into the issue, I see, I agree with this piece of advice. But the brother, he put it forth in a whole nother way. And this is the issue of people marrying outside of their nationalities, their culture. And saying that, people aren't supposed to marry outside of their nationalities or their culture, people of other languages. And, this isn't the statement of the scholars, that a person can't do this. We know that it's permissible for someone to marry someone outside of our culture or nationality or speaks another language. It's permissible for us to marry someone that doesn't even understand our language. Right? So, the way that the brother phrases the question is incorrect. Though I don't know of any scholars, and that doesn't mean that none of them say them because I don't know all of the scholars. But I've never heard any of the scholars say that a person can't do this. What I have heard is that it's highly recommended that a person doesn't do this. Now, before any of you get upset, understand the reason why. First and foremost, we need to separate a couple of things here. We need to understand that us as Westerners, we look at the whole issue of marriage, like we see in the fairy tales. Boyfriends and girlfriends and, everybody coming together and everybody knowing each other and knowing everything about each other and them coming together and making a household. As you all know, this isn't really the way it works in Islam. You're marrying someone and yes, you know of them, but you don't really know them as an individual. There's a lot of blind spots, a lot of room to get to know one another. So I'm not going to say you're marrying a complete stranger but you're marrying someone that you're not familiar with, someone that you have to get to know. That's first and foremost. When we look at marriage like this, we see, okay, there are, how can I say, certain things that are going to make that relationship strong from the beginning. And this is when the ulama, they give advice about something called al-kafa'a. And this is compatibility. When you get married, the more similar that you are to your spouse or the one you're going to marry, the more likely your marriage is going to have reason to last. I'm not going to say it's more likely to last, but it's going to have more likely to have reason to last. For example, another thing, we're going to move off of outside of the culture and we're going to come back to it. Right now, think about it. The brothers are marrying a sister, the sisters are marrying a brother, and they don't really know a whole lot about each other. This one is a professor at a university. This one didn't graduate junior high school. Would anybody say it's haram for them to get married? No. But those issues that they're going to be able to talk about, and things that this individual holds in common with this individual from the beginning. Because you have to think, from the beginning, there's not going to be a lot of common ground. So the more common ground you have, the better. As opposed to two individuals that either didn't graduate high school, because mentally they're going to be generally on that same type of level. Or two college professors that can sit and speak on that particular level, especially if there are college professors in the same science. The amount of compatibility that they're going to have is increased. And this is going to make things a lot better for them when we talk about being able to stay together. When problems come up and things along these sorts, we don't want to talk about this right now, but we have things that we can talk about. Sitting around in our spare time, we can talk about theories and talk about this and talk about this. Issues of economics, the rich and the poor, social customs, hanging out in different social circles. These things, the more similar individuals are, the more that they have in common that will hold them and pull them together, allow them, even when they're disagreeing, to agree on a lot of things. Now, this also works when we talk about culture. When we talk about language, because language really it comes with the culture. You learn a language, you're going to learn the culture that goes with it, generally. So, this advice is just that, it's advice. No one's telling you have to stick to it. And if you don't, you're sinning. You're going against the Quran and the Sunnah. This is just advice as to how you can make your relationship stronger and keep that strength there. You understand? You marry someone from the same background. Me, for instance, I'm an African American. Or some of you like to say indigenous Americans. Whatever it is that you might want to call me. A woman that comes from that same background, being an American, is going to have a lot in common with me. We could talk about the civil rights movement. We could talk about American history. We could talk about a lot of things. We're going to have a lot of things in common that are just common knowledge. To whereas if I was to marry someone from another place, I might not know a lot about her culture or the history of her people or her, like we have in some of the Muslim countries, tribes or clans or however you want to put it. I may not know anything. to where we can sit down and actually have a discussion and exchange thoughts and feelings on this, that, and the other. So as you can see, this issue is something that's advisable when you're talking about having that level of compatibility. You already know where you're at. I mean, let alone, different issues, Republicans and Democrats and all of the rest of this stuff. The more you have in common with the person that you're going to marry, the better, the more common ground you're going to have. And this is the advice that the scholars are trying to give us. It's just advice. So everybody that's getting all upset and saying, well, where are they getting this? And how there's no ayah or hadith about this. Where are they coming up? And listen, it's really not that, I'm not going to say big a deal. It's really not that heavy. It's advice from our scholars saying, okay, well, listen, if you want to increase your chances of the marriage having strong bonds and you're sticking together and having common ground, then stick to marrying these types of people. If you don't, it's recommended. It's not wajib, meaning that you have to do it, you've been commanded to do it, and if you don't, then you're sinning. There's not a sin with not taking this piece of advice. But understand that our scholars, they have the right to give us these pieces of advice. Not only that, they have the responsibility. When it comes to these pieces of advice, then either you can take it or leave it. It's up to you. But just understand that these pieces of advice are coming from scholars not just of our time, but as far back as you can look. So understand this isn't a scholar or two scholars or three scholars that are coming up with this. And it's not a bunch of scholars that are just blindly following one another in this opinion. These scholars are giving us advice in an issue that really, when you look at it, it makes sense. So there's no reason really for us to take offense when people give us this type of advice and they tell us, okay, well, Sheikh Falan says it and Sheikh Alan says it. Because as you see, it makes sense. They are responsible for advising us and pushing us in the right direction. Not to say that this makes sense for everybody, but as a general rule, I'm sure you can see how this would add to strengthening the marriage. And anything that adds to strengthening the marriage and strengthening that bond between the husband and the wife and strengthening the family unit is something that is highly recommended. Right? So, one, the situation really isn't that heavy for everybody to, I see there are a lot of people talking about this issue now on social media and things along these sorts, like it's something that's brand new. That's one. It's nothing that's brand new. And when you sit down and actually think about it and don't take it as though, well, how can they say this and how can they say this? They have reason and right and responsibility. But it's only advice. You take it if you want, leave it if you want. It's up to you. You know, no one is telling you, and I don't know of any of them to say that, listen, you have to do this. You have to take this piece of advice or you're doing wrong. You're going against the manhaj. You're going against the sunnah. I don't know anyone that says this. Two, again, when we hear things that they come across strange to us, and we hear that the scholars, more than one, plural, are advising with certain things, then instead of us looking and saying, listen, this doesn't go along with my intellect, who are they to make this statement? We're talking about the intellect and the knowledge and the wisdom of a scholar, not just a scholar, but a group of scholars. Their intellects together up against ours. If we're going to blame anyone for not understanding, we should be blaming ourselves and not them. This is the adab that we should have when it comes to our scholars and their pieces of advice. May Allah Ta'ala make us of those people who hear the haqq and adhere to it, and make us from those people that see falsehood to be falsehood and stay far away from it. Ameen, ameen, Allahumma ameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك.